The first streaks of sunlight painted Dustwood Valley in deep shades of crimson and gold, turning the cracked earth into a molten canvas. Ezra Calloway wiped the sweat from his brow, the coarse fibers of his work shirt sticking to his skin as he bent to adjust the harness on his plow. For 42 years, he had tended these fields, living a life of quiet isolation. The valley stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted only by sparse cedars and the skeletal remains of long-abandoned homesteads. Ezra liked it that way. The world beyond his fences was noisy, lawless, and unforgiving. He preferred the simple rhythm of earth, horses, and seasons. But today, something felt different. A sudden rustle carried across the dry plains, unnatural and urgent, unlike the ordinary whisper of wind through the tall grasses. Ezra froze, his hands gripping the plow as his eyes scanned the horizon. From the ridge above the southern field, a dark figure stumbled down the slope, kicking up red clay with every uneven step. Ezra squinted. The figure was a woman, or at least he thought it was. Her hair was wild, tangled like the desert brush, and a thin layer of dust and blood streaked her face. Her boots were scuffed and torn, the leather flapping as she ran. Something in her hurried, desperate gait told him she was running from more than just fatigue. Instinctively, Ezra moved toward the barn, his mind racing. He had a shotgun leaning against the stable wall, a relic of his father's insistence on preparedness. With the barrel in hand, he stepped into the open, calling in a voice both cautious and commanding, "Hey, you need help?" The woman's eyes met his, wide with panic and intelligence. She stopped, gasping, and nodded. Her chest rose and fell with rapid, uneven breaths. "Please, anyone." Her voice was hoarse, fractured by fear. Ezra's heart pounded. He had never hidden anyone in his life. He had barely spoken to strangers. And yet, something about her, the raw urgency in her eyes, the way she clutched her arm as if warding off invisible predators, awoke a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. He motioned her toward the barn. "Come inside, quick." They entered the dusty interior together. The barn smelled of hay, old timber, and a lingering tang of horse sweat. Ezra shut the heavy doors, and the world outside became muffled. The distant calls and hoofbeats reduced to ghostly echoes. "What's your name?" Ezra asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Naya," she whispered. She pressed herself against the wall, shivering despite the warmth of the late afternoon sun that filtered through gaps in the roof. They're after me, please. They can't find me." Ezra studied her carefully. There were no signs of immediate injury beyond the scrape on her leg and the blood smeared across her sleeve, but her eyes were haunted, sharp and wary. He lowered his shotgun slowly, replacing fear with cautious determination. "I won't let anyone take you," he said. "But you'll have to stay quiet, at least for now." She nodded, and a fragile trust began to form between them, though both of them knew it could shatter in an instant. Ezra fetched a blanket from the corner of the barn and offered her water from a chipped tin cup. She accepted it with trembling hands, her eyes never leaving the doorway. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the faintest sounds of movement hooves on dirt, low shouts, and a sudden snap of a twig. Someone or several someones were tracking her. She's a runner, Ezra thought, but not from nature, from people. Naya finally spoke more fully, her voice quiet but urgent. "I was with my people, scouting, but the gang, they ambushed us. They took some, killed others. I ran into the hills, and I've been trying to survive ever since." Ezra nodded. His hand shook slightly as he placed the tin cup down. The reality of the situation settled on him like dust after a storm. Sheltering her was more than an act of kindness. It was a choice that could endanger everything he had built in solitude. "I don't know much about the land beyond Dustwood Valley," he said slowly, "or about your people, or—" anything outside this farm. But if they come here, I'll fight. I don't care how many." Naya's gaze softened for the first time. She saw the truth in him in the way his shoulders squared and his knuckles whitened on the gun barrel. Though quiet and unassuming, Ezra Calloway was not a man to be underestimated. Night fell, bringing with it a deeper shadow that swallowed the valley whole. Ezra lit a lantern, the flickering flame casting long, trembling shadows across the barn walls. Naya sat on a bale of hay, her knees pulled to her chest, and Ezra kept watch near the door. Every snapping branch, every distant cry, sent a jolt through him. "I can't stay here long," she admitted, finally speaking aloud her fears. "If they find me, they won't hesitate. They'll kill anyone who helps me." Ezra swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had lived a quiet life, but now the quiet was gone. He felt the unfamiliar surge of adrenaline, coupled with a deep, unshakable determination. "We'll make sure they don't," he said firmly. "You'll be safe here." For the first time in years, Ezra's world had shifted. The dusty fields, the silent horses, the unbroken routine, they were no longer enough. Something or someone had entered his life, and it demanded courage he had never needed before. Hours passed in tense silence. Ezra occasionally peered through the cracks of the barn, listening to the wind-carry sounds of the outside world. Every rustle, every distant echo could mean danger, but he stayed resolute. Naya's breathing eventually slowed as exhaustion overcame fear, and she leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, as though surrendering, at least temporarily, to the safety he offered. Ezra, meanwhile, reflected on the choices that had led him here. A life of isolation had kept him safe, but it had also kept him small, unseen, and unnoticed. The appearance of Naya, desperate, vulnerable, and yet unbowed, was a challenge to everything he had accepted about himself. "I'll protect you," he whispered softly to the darkness, as much for her as for himself. "Even if it costs me everything." By the dim lantern light, Ezra began preparing the barn as best he could. He arranged the bales of hay to provide hiding spots, secured the doors with extra latches, and gathered a few supplies: water, dried meat, and a small stash of ammunition. He had never been a man of action, but the threat outside left no room for hesitation. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the empty plains. The last rays of the sun bled into the horizon, leaving streaks of pink and purple. Somewhere beyond the ridge, hooves pounded, but Ezra's resolve remained steady. He had made a promise to a stranger, a fierce and haunted woman named Naya, and for the first time, he realized that keeping that promise would define not only her fate, but his own. By midnight, the barn was silent, save for the occasional creak of old timber and the low moans of the wind. Ezra lay awake on a cot, rifle at his side, eyes scanning the shadows. Naya slept fitfully on the hay, her face etched with fatigue and worry. Ezra understood the truth now. This was only the beginning. Shelter alone would not save her. Soon, the hunt would come closer, and the decisions he made in the next hours would determine who lived, who died, and who would emerge from the valley unbroken. For the first time in his life, Ezra felt the sting of true danger and the strange, exhilarating pull of purpose. And in the quiet heart of Dustwood Valley, a shy farmer had become a guardian. The sun had barely cleared the jagged horizon of Dustwood Valley when Ezra Calloway awoke to the faint stirrings of Naya beside him. The barn was quiet except for the occasional creak of timbers settling in the morning warmth. Naya was already tending to the small supplies they had salvaged the night before checking the water, wrapping the dried meat carefully in cloth. Her dark eyes alert even as she moved with careful grace. Ezra rubbed the sleep from his eyes, feeling the stiffness of a long night spent on the cot. "Morning," he muttered, keeping his voice low. Naya glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable. "Morning," she replied, then returned her focus to the supplies. She didn't waste words unnecessarily. Every sound outside the barn reminded her of the hunters still at large. Ezra stood, stretching, and moved to the doors. The valley beyond was already bright under the early sunlight, a harsh, golden glare that turned the cracked soil to a blinding mirror. He scanned the horizon and felt that familiar knot of tension tighten in his chest. Somewhere out there, the gang that had ambushed Naya's people might be searching. He didn't know how far they had gotten, but he knew they would not give up easily. "I think it's time we move," Ezra said, turning to her. Naya's eyes flicked to him, wary. "We can't stay here. They'll track the scent, the tracks in the soil. They'll find you, Ezra, and I can't let that happen." He nodded. He had never been a man of travel or confrontation, but sheltering Naya had changed him. "Where to?" he asked. "The Red Clay Hills. There's an abandoned mining outpost. Fewer tracks, hidden valleys. We can rest and plan there." Ezra frowned. He remembered the hills as a boy harsh, unforgiving terrain of rust-colored cliffs and narrow canyons, riddled with old shafts and crumbling buildings. But it was also isolated. And right now, isolation was exactly what they needed. They mounted Ezra's old horse, Clover, a bay mare stubborn in temperament but loyal, and began the slow ride toward the hills. Naya, though her leg was still tender from the bloodied scrape, kept up, her movements fluid and careful. As they rode, she instructed Ezra on the safest paths. "Stick to the low ridges," she said, pointing to a narrow trail carved between two eroded hills. "The tracks there are easier to conceal. Don't let your horse kick up dust." Ezra followed her lead, impressed by her knowledge of the land. Though he had grown up here, he realized there was a world in the wilderness he had never truly seen, the subtle signs of water, the small burrows indicating predators, the hidden hollows where one could rest without being seen. Hours passed under the scorching sun. They drank sparingly from a small creek and used the occasional shade of juniper trees to rest. Conversation was minimal, but when it came, it was cautious, layered with the tension of the situation. "How did you learn all this?" Ezra asked finally, curiosity breaking the silence. Naya glanced at him, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips. "It's survival. My people. We learn early. Reading the land, reading danger, knowing when to fight and when to hide. I was a scout. It's what I do." Ezra nodded, feeling both awe and respect. In that moment, he understood that Naya's strength wasn't just physical, it was a mindset, honed by years of hardship and vigilance. He realized how fragile he had been, and yet, with her guidance, he had become more capable than he had ever thought possible. By late afternoon, the red clay hills rose before them, jagged cliffs burning with the sun's dying gold. Ezra could see the outlines of the abandoned mining structures, a skeletal network of timber and stone, partially collapsed, the roofs sagging under the weight of years. It looked desolate, forgotten, yet it promised safety. They dismounted, tying Clover near a thicket, and approached cautiously. Naya led the way, her hand on the worn hilt of a small hunting knife. "We'll stay inside the main building tonight. There's space in the loft above. It'll give us a vantage point and keep us hidden." The interior was dusty, filled with broken barrels, rusted tools, and the ghosts of miners long gone. Ezra set to work arranging the bales of hay they found, building a rudimentary sleeping area and a small barricade near the doors. Naya inspected each creak of the floor, each shadow cast by the setting sun. "This will do," she said finally. "But we need to stay alert. They'll find our trail eventually." Ezra swallowed hard. He had assumed that once she was hidden, the danger would lessen. But he realized now that hiding her was only the beginning. The real challenge would be surviving the hunt that was sure to follow. Night fell, the sky turning a deep indigo speckled with stars. They built a small fire outside, just enough to keep watch without revealing their position. Naya sat cross-legged, sharpening her knife, while Ezra loaded his shotgun and inspected the area for any signs of movement. "They'll be close," Naya said suddenly, her eyes narrowing at the shadows beyond the firelight. "I can feel it in the wind. The scent of horses, the faint iron of gun metal. They're tracking us." Ezra's heart pounded. He had known fear before, but this was different, raw, unrelenting. He felt a responsibility that transcended his own safety. He had promised to protect her, and he would no matter what. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant crack of a branch. Ezra and Naya spoke in whispers, sharing stories of past hardships. Ezra told her about his life on the farm, about the solitude and quiet that had been both comforting and confining. Naya shared fragments of her pastor band, the ambush, the lives lost, and her determination to survive. By midnight, they had established a routine. Ezra kept watch at the door, rifle ready, while Naya rested lightly, listening, sensing every shift in the night. And yet, despite the danger, an unexpected bond was forming. They were two souls hardened by isolation, now learning to rely on one another in ways they had never imagined. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the night. The unmistakable sound of hooves on stone and distant shouting. The outlaws had found their trail. Ezra motioned for Naya to follow him deeper into the shadows, toward a narrow shaft of the mine. They moved silently, hearts pounding, shadows slipping between the old timber supports. The outlaws' voices echoed in the distance, harsh and cruel, searching for their quarry. Ezra fired a warning shot from the loft, sending one of the gang scrambling, and the distraction gave them the precious seconds needed to disappear further into the ruins. For hours, they crouched in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the hunt fade into the night. Ezra's hands shook slightly from adrenaline, but he felt an unfamiliar surge of strength. He had faced danger and survived, and for the first time he felt alive. The dull ache of loneliness replaced by the urgent pulse of purpose. Naya finally spoke, her voice low and urgent. "We can't run forever, but if we stay smart, we can survive." "You've done well, Ezra. Better than I thought." Ezra swallowed, humbled by her praise. "I've learned from the best," he replied, a faint smile breaking through his tension. As the first light of dawn touched the red clay hills, Ezra and Naya emerged from the shadows. The world seemed sharper, more dangerous, but also more alive. They had survived another night, but the journey was far from over. Somewhere beyond the hills, the outlaws were regrouping, and Naya's people, her band, her family, remained distant. Ezra looked at Naya, noting the determination in her eyes. She was strong, unyielding, and yet human, carrying grief and hope in equal measure. He realized that protecting her was no longer just about survival, it was about honor, courage, and connection. And in that vast, unforgiving landscape, two people, one shy and solitary, the other fierce and hunted, formed an unspoken pact. They would endure together. The red clay hills stretched before them like a challenge, a test of skill, courage, and trust. And both Ezra and Naya knew that they were ready to face it, no matter what dangers awaited in the unforgiving light of day. The wind carried a crisp chill as Ezra and Naya made their way deeper into the heart of the red clay hills. Their journey had been slow and arduous. Every step was a careful balance between caution and survival. Ezra's muscles ached from riding and running over jagged terrain, but the ache was a small price for the safety of the woman beside him. Naya's leg had healed enough to allow her to move with more confidence, though she still favored it slightly. Testing the uneven ground with caution, they traveled in near silence. The only sounds the creak of leather, the occasional whisper of the wind through rust-colored cliffs, and the soft padding of Clover's hooves on the hard-packed earth. Both were keenly aware that danger still stalked them. The outlaws who had ambushed Naya's band were relentless, men who would not stop until revenge was claimed. But today, a different feeling stirred in the air, an anticipation that neither could ignore. "I can feel them," Naya said quietly, breaking the silence for the first time in hours. Her dark eyes scanned the horizon, sharp as a hawk's. "My people. They're coming. Not the outlaws, Ezra, my band. They've not forgotten me." Ezra slowed Clover, glancing at her with a mixture of wonder and caution. "Your people? Do you think they'll trust me?" Naya's gaze softened, though a shadow of uncertainty lingered. "They are fierce, protective, and cautious. They may see you as an outsider, but they will see what I've seen. You kept me safe. You helped me survive. That will speak for itself." Ezra swallowed hard, realizing how small and alone he had always felt and how profound this moment was. In a life marked by routine and solitude, he had never encountered a situation so charged with danger, hope, and destiny. The landscape began to change as they approached a hidden valley flanked by steep cliffs. The red clay hills gave way to a narrow canyon lined with scrub and scattered boulders. Here, Naya motioned for them to dismount. "We'll wait. They'll come from the ridge to the east. The wind carries sound there first, and horses leave less trace along the cliffs." Ezra tied Clover to a nearby juniper, keeping the mare close but hidden. He scanned the horizon, rifle ready, and listened. There was nothing yet, only the soft sigh of wind and the distant caw of a raven. Hours passed with tense anticipation. Naya crouched beside him, scanning every shadow. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then, far off, a faint rumble reached their ears, the unmistakable rhythm of many hooves pounding the earth. Ezra squinted toward the ridge. A growing cloud of dust and movement became visible. At first he thought it was the outlaws, but the formation was too disciplined, too purposeful. Mounted figures appeared, their horses steady, their lines organized. The glint of feathers and painted faces caught the sunlight, and Ezra realized with a mixture of awe and relief that these were not men seeking vengeance. They were warriors. Apache warriors. Naya's face lit with recognition and joy. "It's them!" she cried, rising from her crouch. "My people, my band!" Ezra's heart raced as the riders descended into the canyon. They were numerous, their presence commanding and protective, forming a tight perimeter as they approached the two travelers. Naya ran toward them, her voice calling out names in a language Ezra could not understand. Her movements fluid and instinctive. The warriors dismounted, forming a protective circle around Ezra and Naya. Their eyes were sharp, scrutinizing, and for a moment, Ezra felt the weight of their judgment. He had never faced an audience like this. Men and women whose loyalty to one another ran deep, whose respect was not given lightly. Their leader, a tall man with streaks of white threading through his black hair, approached Ezra. He studied him intently, taking in the farmer's posture, his calm yet wary demeanor, and the rifle in his hands. There was a long, tense silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the canyon. Finally, the chief spoke, his voice deep and measured. "You kept her safe. You brought her through danger. For that, you are honored." Ezra inclined his head, words failing him. He had expected suspicion, perhaps anger, but respect was far more profound than he had imagined. Naya stood beside him, her eyes bright with gratitude and relief. The warriors escorted them into the valley where their camp had been established. Tents and lean-tos dotted the open space, fires crackling, smoke curling into the dusky sky. Ezra saw children peeking from behind the tents, elders seated on blankets, and men sharpening weapons or mending leather. There was an air of quiet vigilance, tempered by trust in the few who had returned to lead them as the evening deepened. The Apache shared their stories with Ezra. He listened, enraptured. As Naya explained their journey through the harsh deserts and mountains, their struggles to survive against outlaws, settlers, and the relentless encroachment of foreign lands. Each story revealed a depth of courage, community, and resilience that Ezra had never fully appreciated. By the firelight, Ezra began to see the bonds between the warriors and their people. He realized that this was more than a reunion, it was a reclaiming of strength, a reaffirmation of identity. And he, a quiet farmer from a solitary valley, had played a role in it. Night fell fully, the sky a blanket of stars stretching endlessly above the red clay hills. Ezra and Naya sat together near one of the smaller fires, the flickering flames casting warm shadows on their faces. Naya looked at Ezra with a mixture of affection and pride. "You did more than I could have expected," she said softly. "Not everyone would risk themselves like you did." Ezra smiled faintly, the tension of the past weeks slowly easing. "I didn't think I could, but I had to. You needed someone, and somehow I found courage I didn't know I had." Naya nodded, eyes reflecting the firelight. "We'll face more challenges," she said, her voice steady. "The outlaws are not finished. They'll return when they realize I'm here with my people. But tonight, we rest." Ezra looked around the camp, noticing the careful organization, the quiet vigilance of the warriors, and the warmth of a community reunited. He felt a strange mix of awe and belonging. For the first time, he was part of something larger than himself. Over the next few days, Ezra integrated himself into the rhythms of the camp. He helped repair shelters, prepare food, and assist with water supplies. Though he was an outsider, the Apache welcomed his efforts, recognizing his quiet dedication and calm presence. Naya guided him, teaching him more about the land's survival and the subtle strategies that her people had honed over generations. Ezra watched Naya interact with her band, the ease of her movements, the respect she commanded, the loyalty and trust she inspired. He realized that her strength was not only in her skill or courage, but in her heart. She had lived through loss, danger, and fear, yet she carried hope and determination as naturally as she breathed. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and the shadows stretched long across the valley floor, Naya and Ezra climbed to a rocky overlook. From this vantage, they could see the distant plains, the ridges where the outlaws had once chased them, and the hidden paths that might be used to approach or escape. "They'll come," Ezra said quietly, his voice tense but steady. Naya's eyes followed his gaze. "Yes, but we'll be ready. My people are strong, and we have you now. You've learned how to survive in ways most outsiders never could. That knowledge, it will matter." Ezra felt a deep pride, tempered by humility. He was no longer the shy, reclusive farmer who had lived in Dustwood Valley for decades. He was part of a living, breathing network of courage, loyalty, and determination. And he knew that whatever the outlaws threw at them, he and Naya would face it together. With a newfound strength neither had expected as dusk fell over the red clay hills. Ezra and Naya descended the overlook, moving back into the safety of the camp. Fires glowed warmly, casting dancing shadows across the faces of warriors, children, and elders. The scent of cooking meat mingled with the dusty earth and cedar smoke, creating a sense of home, however temporary, in the rugged wilderness. That night, as Ezra kept watch near the edge of the camp, he reflected on the journey so far. Naya's arrival had brought danger, yes, but it had also brought meaning, connection, and a glimpse of a world he had never known. In the quiet moments, he realized that he had found not only courage but purpose, and that, perhaps, was the most profound survival skill of all. And somewhere beyond the hills, in the distant plains, the faint echo of hooves and voices reminded them both that the outlaws were still out there. The hunt was not over. But for now, surrounded by Naya's people and the flickering light of the campfires, Ezra felt a rare, almost unimaginable peace. He glanced at Naya, her silhouette lit by the dancing flames, her posture calm but alert, and silently vowed, come what may, he would protect her. He would face whatever danger awaited. He had crossed the threshold from isolation into a life that demanded courage, loyalty, and love, and he would not turn back. The morning sun rose over Dustwood Valley, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Ezra Calloway stood on the ridge overlooking his farm, the familiar fields now a tense battlefield. Clover pawed at the dirt beside him, nostrils flaring, sensing the tension in the air. Beside him, Naya adjusted her stance, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. The wind carried distant sounds, hooves, and voices that signaled the approach of the outlaws. They were coming. Ezra's fingers tightened around the rifle. His life had been quiet and solitary for decades, but this day, this moment, demanded every ounce of courage he had found in the weeks since Naya had arrived. He glanced at her, noting the calm precision in her posture. She was not just a survivor. She was a warrior, a protector, and now his ally. They won't expect this, Naya said quietly. They'll think we're still scattered, still hiding. But my people and I are ready. And you, Ezra? You'll see how far you've come. Ezra swallowed hard. He had never been a man of confrontation, but he knew one truth now. He could not shy away. Not from her, not from the outlaws, not from the future that had suddenly demanded bravery from a man who had long avoided the world. The outlaws appeared on the ridge to the north, a cloud of dust rising behind them. They were armed, cruel, and confident men who believed they could walk into the valley and claim their revenge. But they underestimated the unity, vigilance, and strength of the Apache warriors who had descended into Dustwood Valley with Naya. Ezra signaled to Naya, and she nodded. Their plan, improvised yet precise, had been formed over the past days. They would draw the outlaws into the valley's natural choke points, using the rugged terrain and the element of surprise to their advantage. The first shots rang out when the outlaws entered the valley floor. Ezra fired from a hidden boulder, picking off a man who had separated from the group. The others ducked instinctively, but Naya was already in motion, moving with a predator's grace through the dust and rocks. She disarmed one attacker with the swift motion of her knife, her movements fluid and deadly. Ezra crouched behind cover, taking careful aim and releasing another shot. He had never fired like this before, not in life or death necessity. Yet something deep within him had awakened, a confidence born of survival, of loyalty, and of the urgent need to protect the woman beside him. From the ridges above, Apache warriors swooped down, their approach silent and disciplined. They surrounded the outlaws with an almost ceremonial precision, cutting off escape routes and guiding them into narrow corridors between rocks and cliffs. Ezra watched, awestruck, as Naya led a group of young warriors through a flanking maneuver that forced the outlaws into submission. The outlaws fought back, desperate and reckless, but the combined force of Ezra, Naya, and the Apache was overwhelming. Ezra moved through the chaos, helping a young warrior up after a stumble, providing cover fire and keeping a steady hand despite the pounding of his heart. He realized in the heat of battle that he had become more than the shy farmer he had once been. He had become a protector, a defender, a man who could face violence for the sake of others. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. Dust rose like a fog, punctuated by shouts, gunfire, and the rhythmic stamping of hooves. Ezra and Naya fought side by side, a silent understanding passing between them. Every glance, every movement was in sync. They were not just allies. They were partners in survival and strategy. Eventually, the tide turned. The outlaws, realizing they were outmaneuvered and outnumbered, attempted to flee. But the Apache warriors, guided by Naya, anticipated their moves, cutting off escape routes and surrounding the remaining men. Ezra fired a final warning shot, and the last of the gang surrendered. The valley fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of horses and warriors and the distant calls of crows circling overhead. Ezra lowered his rifle, his hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. He looked at Naya, who was wiping dust from her face, her expression calm but fierce. You did it," Ezra said, still catching his breath. Naya shook her head, smiling faintly. "We did it, together." The warriors approached, forming a circle around the captured outlaws. Their chief, the tall man with streaks of white in his black hair, stepped forward, nodding at Ezra. "You fought with honor," he said. "You risked your life to protect hers. For that, you are one of us, in spirit if not in blood." Ezra bowed his head, overwhelmed by the acknowledgement. He had never sought recognition or glory, but the respect of these people so strong, so proud, was more profound than anything he had experienced in his solitary life. Naya walked beside him, her hand brushing his arm lightly, a gesture of trust and gratitude. "You've changed, Ezra," she said softly. "You're not just the shy farmer anymore. You're a man who can stand in the face of danger and hold his ground. And you've saved more than me today. You've helped reclaim my people's strength." Ezra shook his head, humbled. "I never thought I could, but you showed me how to fight, how to survive, how to care about more than just myself." For the next few days, the valley transformed. Ezra's farm became a hub of activity as the Apache worked to repair structures, tend to horses, and share their knowledge with the farmer. Children played among the fields, laughter ringing out over the once silent land. Naya's people shared stories, songs, and traditions, weaving their culture into the fabric of Dustwood Valley. Ezra and Naya grew closer, bound not only by shared danger but by respect and admiration. They worked side by side, repairing fences, planting crops, and preparing food. Ezra taught some of the younger warriors techniques he had learned on the farm, while Naya shared her knowledge of tracking, survival, and strategy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Ezra and Naya stood together on a rise overlooking the fields. The valley was quiet now, peaceful in a way it had not been in months. Fires burned softly in the Apache camp, and the horses grazed contentedly. "You think it will stay peaceful?" Ezra asked, his voice thoughtful. Naya shook her head. "The world beyond these hills is still dangerous. But here, we've made a sanctuary. Together, we've turned fear into strength, danger into protection. That matters more than anything." Ezra nodded, feeling a rare sense of belonging. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be part of a community, to fight not just for oneself but for others. The following weeks saw the valley flourish under the combined efforts of Ezra and the Apache. Crops grew, livestock thrived, and the once lonely fields became alive with movement, laughter, and hope. Naya stayed, honoring both her people and the bond she had formed with Ezra. They became partners in the truest sense, protectors of the valley, keepers of the land, and friends bound by experience and trust. As the years passed, travelers spoke of Dustwood Valley not as a quiet, lonely place but as a land of courage, loyalty, and unity. Stories of the shy farmer who had sheltered an Apache woman and the Adaman, fierce warriors who had returned with her, spread across the region. Dustwood Valley became a symbol of what could be achieved when courage met compassion, when the solitary and the strong came together to protect one another. And in the quiet moments, when the wind rustled the tall grasses and the sun sank behind the hills, Ezra and Naya would stand together, watching the horizon. They knew the valley was safe, their people were protected, and their story, a tale of survival, bravery, and trust, would live on. Ezra had crossed from solitude into a life that demanded bravery, loyalty, and love. Naya had returned to her people, but in doing so, she had forged a connection that would endure. And in the heart of Dustwood Valley, two lives intertwined by fate, courage, and determination found a home. The Outlaws had been defeated, the Apache reunited, and the valley had been reclaimed not by one man, not by one woman, but by the courage, wisdom, and unity of many. And at the center of it all stood Ezra and Naya, the farmer and the scout, forever changed by the trials they had faced together, ready to meet whatever future lay ahead. The wind carried their laughter across the valley, mingling with the scent of fresh earth and smoke from the campfires, a testament to survival, hope, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the fire of adversity.